Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into something absolutely mind-blowing, the mechanics of your own mind. We're going to look closely at how our brains actually adapt to learning, to habits, and even to recovery. We're unpacking the hidden power of neuroplasticity, and honestly, I am so incredibly excited to break this down for you. So let me ask you this right off the bat. Is your brain a finished machine, or is it more like a city under construction? It's a super common assumption to just imagine the brain as something that's fully built once during childhood and then, well, stays mostly the same for the rest of your life. And sure, that picture is comforting, but it is actually wrong in the most important way possible. We really got to stop viewing the brain as a statue, something that's finished, fixed, and totally unchanging. Instead, I want you to picture your brain as this living, breathing city that is continually renovating itself. Think about it. In a real city, roads get wider when traffic uses them a lot, right? And when side streets are just ignored, they stop getting maintenance and eventually just fade away. Well, your brain is a living web of cells that behaves the exact same way. And that brings us to the star of the show, neuroplasticity. Simply put, this is the brain changing its network based on what it repeatedly uses and pays attention to. So learning isn't just you tossing new information into some dusty mental filing cabinet. Not at all. Learning is the brain physically reorganizing itself around your experiences. All right, let's jump into part 1, paths get stronger with use, or as I like to call it, the forest trail metaphor. To really grasp how the brain structurally changes when we practice something new, think about the very first time you try a new skill. It's literally like pushing through thick brush in a forest. It takes a ton of effort, and it's pretty clumsy. But walk that exact route again, and it gets a little easier. With enough trips, a clear, distinct trail forms, and communication in the brain becomes highly efficient. But beware, if nobody uses that trail for a long time, it starts to fade. The brain just doesn't preserve every single path at full strength forever. Because of this whole process, we really need to totally reframe how we view repetition. To us humans, repeating a task over and over can feel super tedious or boring. But to the brain, repetition is a vital message. Every single time you repeat an action, you aren't merely memorizing. You are sending a loud and clear signal to your network saying, hey, this pattern matters, keep it available, build this path more strongly. But hey, neuroplasticity isn't just about growth. We have to look in the other direction too. That brings us to part 2, the power of pruning. The brain as a garden. Imagine if every single plant in a garden just grew wildly. You'd have unchecked growth, right? The whole space would become messy, chaotic, and just totally unmanageable. Well, the brain avoids this through active pruning. It actively keeps what's useful and efficient, and it quietly removes or weakens the connections you just no longer need. This is huge, guys, because it means forgetting isn't a failure, not at all. It is a super economical process, exactly like a gardener pruning, which keeps your whole mental system running efficiently. Now, even with this incredible system, we all know learning can still feel deeply frustrating at first. Why is that? Well, that's part 3, knowing versus doing. Connecting the network. Think about riding a bike. Knowing how to ride is really just having the data, like understanding the basic physics of how a bicycle stays upright. But doing? Doing is entirely different. It requires coordination, timing, and physical feedback. Completely different parts of your brain actually have to talk to each other. When you practice, you're taking these effortful, separate sequences and teaching your network to compress them into one smooth automatic path. So, how do we make sure the brain actually builds the paths we want? That brings us to a critical catalyst. Part 4, attention is a spotlight, telling the brain what matters. Here is the hard truth. The brain only rewrites what the spotlight of attention actually touches. Picture yourself standing in a completely pitch black room, holding a flashlight. You can only clearly see what the beam lands on, right? If you're distracted or, just passively half listening while scrolling on your phone, the signal to change the network is incredibly weak. The brain is not some passive sponge. It absolutely requires that spotlight to make lasting structural changes. So, you're probably wondering, what exactly captures that spotlight? Well, the brain remembers repeated actions, meaningful events, emotionally charged moments, actively used skills, and actions that are linked to a reward or a consequence. Basically, it focuses on what has a real impact. This is exactly why actively working with information, like testing yourself or applying it in real life, is exponentially more powerful than just passively reading words on a page. But what happens when you're actively engaged, trying your absolute best, and you still fail? Let's pivot to a highly empowering reframe. Part 5, Mistakes are just feedback, the brain's internal coach. I love this concept because it completely removes the shame from fumbling around when you're a beginner. A mistake literally just tells the brain exactly where the current model is inaccurate. When you try to throw a dart and it completely misses the board, that mismatch is incredible data. It's your internal coach saying, okay, that missed, let's adjust the network for next time. Awkwardness and errors are not signs that you're broken. They are the literal mechanism the brain uses to correct its own paths. When you put all of this together, it sparks a massive shift in how you see yourself. Part 6. You are the brain mechanic. A new identity. Thinking like a brain mechanic means you finally stop judging yourself and start diagnosing the system instead. You start viewing your skills simply as routes that are currently under construction. You see your habits as patterns you've repeatedly strengthened over time. You treat your memory as frequently used access points. You can finally, once and for all, stop saying, I'm just not wired that way, and start recognizing that you are shaped by the exact patterns you train your brain to keep. So, if there is one crucial point to really anchor in your mind today, it's this. Memory, habit, and recovery are all just a changing network adapting to experience. They aren't separate, magical mysteries. They are just different faces of the exact same underlying system. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine, turning your past experience into a more useful, more efficient future. And that brings us to our ultimate takeaway from the source material. If the brain can learn the pattern, it can also unlearn and rebuild it. I mean, wow. That perfectly illustrates your absolute agency here. You don't have to consciously control every single microscopic connection in your head. That would be impossible. But you entirely control the direction of the renovation based on what you choose to practice and pay attention to. Which leaves us with one final, provocative question for you. What pathway will you choose to build next? Now that you have this lens, you aren't just some passive passenger in your own mind. You are the architect of your brain's ongoing construction. So keep this in mind the next time you're learning something difficult, and embrace the rewiring process. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to see what paths you build.